think about the long-term consequences.
Well, we could keep on talking about that. We're going to take a short break. We've talked a lot about how the brain develops, and when we come back, we'll talk about what drugs do to the brain when our program, The Brain on Drugs, continues. And welcome back to our program, The Brain on Drugs. It is a fascinating topic. We're going to dive back into our topic of what drugs do to the brain. Well, how do drugs impact the brain? In what ways?
Wow, so many different drugs, so many different areas of the brain they impact, but ultimately all drugs of abuse impact on this reward pathway, this pleasure area that's, as you can see in this slide, depicted here in red. This is an area that rewards us for normal functions. These are all the normal pleasurable experiences that reinforce themselves. Food, sex. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for food and sex being reinforcing activities.
And all those communicate pleasure to the brain in one way or another.
And absolutely. And the drugs, in fact, work on those same specific areas, only they turn up the heat. They turn up the volume more.
Does it affect nerve cells as well?
I'm sorry?
Nerve cells as well?
Absolutely. It can have specific effects on specific cells. So, but again, different drugs are different. Alcohol, for example, affects every cell in the body and specifically works on some more than others. Cocaine binds specifically to some cocaine receptors in the brain that we know now are mostly in this area of the brain involved in this reward. Here's a slide showing cocaine and brain receptors. We can see here that the cocaine actually binds to what we call the dopamine reuptake transporter. It's depicted here in the red. And what it does is it blocks the reuptake of this neurotransmitter dopamine. And when it blocks the reuptake, that means it floods the area with dopamine, and you like that. That is part of the pleasurable experiences that drugs cause.
So how does that affect our processing of information? What does it do?
Well, I think one of the things that it does is it sensitizes us to the next time we have an opportunity to use that drug. We remember those pleasurable experiences and we'd like to do it again. So even sometimes the environment that you're in or the setting will trigger that pleasurable response and will cause you to want to engage in the behavior again.
But what about when you're under this extreme pleasure? You're at the maximum high. How does it affect your ability or a person's ability to make decisions, to think, to process what's going on outside?
Well, it affects it quite a bit. I mean, there's a major impact of intoxication with drugs. People who are intoxicated under the influence of drugs don't make good decisions.
So we can use intoxication with drugs as well as with alcohol?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Alcohol is a drug. There's not a distinction here except perhaps the legality of the drug. So no. These work on the same areas of the brain. They have the same abuse liability, as we say. And again, it impacts your judgment, your decision making, your motor function, your ability to drive, for example. We know that. That's and so it has impact on a lot of these different areas of the brain.
Senta, do most people know this information we've just talked about?
No, they understand that something happens to their teen. The teen's emotions are sometimes they appear to us adults to be really out of control. They'll be laughing one minute and they'll be crying the next minute, and for no apparent reason. So that we don't understand what's going on. We think it's just oh, they've got the hormones. They're crazy at this age. But again, back to the adolescent brain development piece of this question, we now understand that they are moving from an emotional place. They're just developing their executive function or their judgment ability, and when they're in that stage, we need to understand that we need to be clear, we need to be firm, we need to be consistent, we need to give them lots of experiences to help them develop their skill set, just like I think you were talking at the break of skills like practicing using the piano or other skills, practicing sports.
Redirect.
Right. Well, the brain is rewiring, we're reconnecting, we're building the communication, those connections that are going to be critical to them the rest of their lives. And as they develop that executive function, their ability to use judgment, it is up to those of us who care and love them to give them the kind of experiences and the environment, because it's the experiences that they have, the environment that they're in during this critical developmental stage has some long-lasting impacts. We know that who among us hasn't traveled, halfway around the world to go to a reunion with people that we went to high school with? We have some emotional attachments that we make during that period that really stay with us the rest of our lives, and give us the impressions that we have of what we like and what we enjoy. And when you introduce another element to that has an impact on the pleasure center, we don't know what that's going to do long term, but we do know from the research that when youth begin to use alcohol and other drugs, the earlier they do that, the more likely they are to develop dependence and addiction. They are more likely to have serious problems later. They start experiencing lack of school success. They have problems in school. They're more likely to then begin to get into some serious consequences, health consequences, and life consequences.
Amelia, when does this start? At what age are we seeing these kinds of behaviors?
Well, typically the age of onset, the age of exposure opportunity is way back in the middle school years, where children have a chance to try things.
Has that changed through the years?
It's gotten younger.
Younger and younger?
And what has also changed is the variety of opportunity exposures. The slide that is being shown is among students who have entered college. And when you look at college-bound adolescents, of course, it's going to be different. But the age of exposure opportunity...
And these are exposure items, alcohol, tobacco...
Right, just having a chance to try something. And the age of exposure opportunity is, in the middle school to high school years for alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana. But then when they hit college, they have a wide variety of exposure opportunities to non-medical prescription drugs and other illicit drugs.
So does it progress from a choice to a need?
In some people, we know that there's a lot of work on the genetic vulnerability to developing drug addiction problems.
Are some people wired that way, predisposed to be that way?
Are predisposed to more problems given the exposure to the drugs. Certainly, we know that.
Mm-hmm. How do the drugs impair the ability to think clearly? How do they act?
Well, long-term drug use actually causes a dysfunction in this area that we've been talking about, this prefrontal area involved in judgment and decision making. So you can't weigh the risks and the positives so well, the consequences. You can't do those kinds of calculations that you normally do anymore. And what becomes much more important is, in fact, the drug itself. As you can see in this slide, this one area of the brain, the striatum, where we see these are showing you changes in the dopamine receptor molecule.
And so in naltrexone, what, cocaine, meth, alcohol, and heroin.
So we have the control on one side, as you can see, and the brighter colors, red and yellow here, have more dopamine receptor binding. And on the other side is an individual who's a long-term user, someone addicted to cocaine, meth, alcohol, or heroin. And you can see in this striatal area, again, this is that area involved in reward and reinforcement. There's a dramatic reduction in the amount of dopamine activity in those areas. And so there's been a dramatic change or consequence after long-term drug use.
Can this be reversed? Can this change? Can we recover what's happened?
Treatment does work, and recovery, of course, is what we want everyone to strive for that is in our treatment programs. So yes, we can help people who have developed dependence and addiction, and we can help them move to a place of recovery where they can regain their lives.
Tim, do different drugs react differently in a person's brain?
Well, the short answer is yes, but there's a commonality. Specific drugs, as I mentioned, might interact with a specific receptor in different areas of the brain, but ultimately they all end up impacting on this dopamine system because that's that area involved in that reward or that reinforcement. Here's an example of cocaine. Actually, this is your brain on drugs. So this is actually
this is not the frying pan and egg.
No, this is actually from the early 90s. This is the time course of cocaine. What you're seeing is the light colors, the bright colors here, are actually binding of cocaine in the brain of this individual. And this is first one is 1 to 2 minutes, and then you see cocaine starts to bind in these areas. And then as you see at about 6 or 7 minutes, this same area where I was talking about dopamine receptors before, it's the same area, this kidney-shaped area, this striatal area. Cocaine is binding in that area at 6 to 7 minutes, and you really that's part of the impact of what drugs are having on that area.
Is that the maximum of pleasure at that point? Is the 7 to 8 minute mark somewhere in that area?
It probably is associated with the highest level of euphoria. I mean, I'm not a drug user, so I can't tell you the answer to that, but the studies have shown that the rapid onset, and that's what really keeps people coming back.
And those frames were taken how? Is that MRI or what technology?
Those particular ones, I believe, were positron emission tomography.
Okay. And those are just slices across the brain, and it was done from a period of 1 to 30 minutes?
I think that's
something
what the
like
time
that
course was, yeah.
And that's how fast the threshold, how fast the high comes and goes
Well,
away.
anyone who's taken drugs could tell you that the threshold's very quick for cocaine. If you take it, if you inject it, if you smoke it, if you inhale it, those are very rapid onsets. And so the route of administration is also an important aspect. The faster it gets into the brain, the bigger the impact, and the more likely that person will end up having a problem and becoming addicted.
You can also see where addiction, by looking at those scans, I think you can get an idea of how addiction happens, because the high is so fast and then it comes back down, and because it's impacted your pleasure center, you're going to seek that behavior again. Over time, you need more and more of the drug in order to do that, so it has a physiological impact as well as working on that emotional component.
Is that blinding the person from seeing that there are consequences, future consequences from doing that behavior?
Yes, and I think that one of the cardinal features of drug addiction is the narrowing of the behavior associated with drug use. So not just that they can't see the consequences, but they can't see the consequences on how the drug use is restricting other parts of their life. So typically drug users will end up consciously or unconsciously seeking out people who are doing the same things. So all of their friends become drug users. All of their activities are focused on getting that drug. So missing class or a relationship falls second to the drug use.
And that becomes their circle of society.
And that becomes their circle, and that's the cardinal feature of drug addiction.
So it insulates them to some degree.
And then it just sort of gets worse and worse. And the people that they've hurt and left behind are not going to be there to help them because they become so frustrated. So it just ends up with this very negative feedback cycle.
Right.
And I think another thing to keep in mind is again, when you think about the situation that Amelia just described, almost like when we were talking about adolescents, well, why can't they just make a better decision? And those who are left behind and who love them and are not caught up in this cycle that they're in don't understand why they just can't make a decision to move out of it. And as we see, it has a profound physiological impact on the brain. And a lot of those functions then are not able to, they're just physically not able to make those decisions. So
what do we do for those people?
Well, we need to intervene as early as possible. One of the challenges that we have in my field, because I'm trying to communicate what they've given us, this wonderful research, is that the sooner that you can intervene with someone, the better. Because if you wait a long time, it becomes much more difficult. And traditionally we think, well, you know, you have to wait until they hit bottom. You have to wait until you can get them into, until they want help. But particularly for adolescents, the message is please don't wait. The first sign of something, even if it's picking up a tobacco habit, if it's beginning, the first sign of any use of alcohol, a lot of times we see people in our young people, adolescents in our treatment system, it isn't until they begin to get in trouble with the law, maybe with marijuana, that we see them in treatment. And by then they've built these behaviors, they've already moved into a cycle that Amelia was discussing. They've dropped off friends, they've developed this other peer circle. So our message to parents is to intervene as early as possible. And that alcohol is serious. Too often, because it is a legal drug, because there's a lot of promotion with it, and because many of us as well use it, we don't perceive it as being so dangerous for an adolescent, when really it is very dangerous.
It is very, very dangerous.
And while we don't know exactly what it may do to a developing brain, we do know that all these other things do occur. And particularly, with adolescents, please don't wait. Please intervene early. And there are many resources out there to help parents, schools, and the youth themselves.
Very good message. Well, we've got to take another short break. And when we come back, we'll talk about what to do with all of this information. Knowing the science could make your prevention efforts more successful.
Drugs are talking to your kids. Are you? Find the right words at drugfree.org.
Freeze 1.
There were stacks of heads chiseling in the easy.
There were stacks of heads chiseling in the heezy.
Freeze 2.
Homie was flossing his grip of cheddar.
Homie was flossing his grip of cheddar. His whip is a janky hoopty.
His whip is a janky hoopty.
Janky hoopty? His whip is a janky hoopy.
You may not understand your kids, but your kids understand you. Talk to them about drugs. Need help? Get help. Visit our website at drugfree.org.
Well, the best way to keep drugs away from the brain is to keep people away from the drugs in the first place. And that means effective prevention efforts. Tim, you had a follow-up you wanted to say.
Well, Stan, we were talking during the break about the early interventions, and we absolutely are all on the same page. How important is that for our adolescents? But you know, it's actually also important for adults as well. And so we didn't want to leave that out. To do an intervention to prevent people from progressing from drug use to abuse to full-blown addiction is very important. And so you really don't need to wait till people hit rock bottom. Interventions can work for people who are just abusing drugs before they become dependent, and that's a really important message we want to get across.
So early.
Early.
Early. So how has the evolution of science and knowledge impacted our prevention programs?
Well, we are thrilled to have these new pieces of information. It explains so many things about why we do the things that we do. And we talk about, we want parents to have dinner with their children regularly. Well, what is it about having dinner with your children regularly? It's about communicating standards and ideas. It's what Amelia was talking about, being able to have the relationship there that helps us be clear, be firm, be consistent with our youth.